Montana Territory, July 1877. The sun was barely over the bluffs when the rifle cracked through the morning stillness, and Michael Hartley's boots hit the dry earth before his horse had even stopped. Smoke curled from a cabin chimney half a mile down the slope, but the shot had come from the woods at the edge of the creek. He moved fast, hand on his holster, eyes sharp. He had not expected to find anyone out here. The land was too raw, too scarred by war and winter. But when he saw the cabin last night, lights flickering behind shuttered windows, he had waited nearby, just in case. Now someone was in trouble. He stepped lightly, careful not to break twigs beneath his boots. The brush opened to a narrow clearing, and there she was barefoot, her dress torn at the hem, a rifle shaking in her hands. She had fire in her eyes, but fear too, wild and bright. "Are you here to hurt me?" she asked, voice rough and low like she had not spoken in days. "No," Michael said, slowing his steps. He held his hands up, one palm toward her, the other resting on his chest. "I'm here to keep you safe, if you'll have me." She stared at him for a long moment, then lowered the rifle just a little. "You with the men who came through here 2 nights ago?" "No, ma'am," he said. "I rode in from Fort Benton. Been trailing cattle rustlers for 3 days. I heard a shot." Her shoulders sagged just a bit, like the weight of the world had been pressing down on her for too long. "They took everything, tried to take me too." Michael's chest tightened. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, then looked back over her shoulder. "It ain't me I'm worried about." He followed her inside the cabin. It was 1 room, 4 walls and a dirt floor, but it was clean and warm. In the corner, wrapped in a patchwork quilt, 2 children slept close together, blonde hair tangled, cheeks flushed. A boy and a girl, maybe 6 or 7. "They're not mine," she said, her voice softer now. "Their mother was my sister. She died last fall. Their father left before then. I've been raising them since." Michael looked at the children, then back at her. "What's your name?" "Susanna Avery," she said. "And you, Michael Hartley?" She nodded, like she was trying the name on in her head. "You law?" "No. Just a man who's seen too many people left behind." She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "I can handle myself." "I know you can," he said, "but you should not have to do it alone." Her eyes flicked toward the window. "They said they might come back. Then I am staying." She looked at him again, longer this time. "You do not even know me." "I know you stood your ground, scared but steady. I know you took in 2 children who ain't yours by blood. I know you are still here, even after everything." Her throat worked like she was trying not to cry. She turned away. Michael stepped closer, slow and careful. "Let me help." She did not answer right away, but she did not tell him to go. That was enough. By nightfall, Michael had gathered what supplies he could from his saddlebag and set up a small camp behind the cabin. He kept the fire low, rifle near. Susanna had fed the children Clara and Calvin, she told him, and tucked them back into the quilt. They had not asked questions, just clung to her like she was the only thing they trusted. Afterward, she sat on the step outside, arms wrapped around her knees. Michael joined her, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "Thank you," she said. "I ain't doing this for thanks." "Then why?" He looked out across the hills. "Because I know what it is to lose everything." She looked at him then, really looked. "What did you lose?" "My wife," he said. "And our son. Fever took them both 3 winters back." Her voice softened. "I'm sorry," he nodded. "I was angry for a long time, thought I would never come back from it. And now, I saw smoke from your chimney. That is what brought me here. I was not looking for anything, but maybe I found something anyway." She was quiet a long time. The wind moved through the trees behind them, soft and steady. Then she said, "I do not know how to trust someone again." "I will not rush you," he said, "but I will stay until you ask me not to." Her fingers brushed the edge of the cup. "I do not want to be afraid anymore." Michael looked at her, his voice low. "Then you will not be, not while I am here." She looked up at him, her lips parting just slightly. There was a flicker in her eyes, not fear this time, but something else, something that felt like hope. She whispered, "Okay." And Michael Hartley knew he was not leaving this place. Not now. Not ever. Just before dawn, the wind shifted. Michael had stood through the night, rifle balanced against his shoulder, eyes fixed on the tree line to the west. He hadn't seen movement, but something in the air pulled at him like the land itself was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, Susanna moved quietly, laying a shawl across each child before stepping out. Her hair was braided back now, and the bruises on her forearms had started to darken. She didn't flinch when she saw him standing guard. "I made coffee," she said. "It's bitter but warm." He followed her to the doorway. "You sleep at all, some?" She handed him a tin cup before leaning against the frame, arms crossed against the chill. "Calvin's been having dreams. Keep saying the men had a dog with them." Michael took a slow sip. "Dogs ain't quiet, I'd have heard one." She nodded, eyes on the hills. "He's gotten stories tangled with memory before. Might be nothing." "You trust your gut." "I trust what I can see," she said. "And I see you haven't moved since nightfall." "I've learned patience," he said. "Comes from knowing the cost of rushing." Susanna's gaze lingered on the horizon. "I used to think if I worked hard enough, kept quiet, stayed out of the way, nothing bad would find me." Michael didn't speak. She wasn't looking for reassurance. She turned her head. "What was your wife's name?" He hesitated. "Ellen." Susanna nodded once. "What color were her eyes?" "Gray. Like river stone, mine are green," she said, then looked away quickly. "Wasn't trying to compare." "You didn't," he said. She stepped down onto the earth, walking a slow circle around the clearing. Her hands brushed the tops of the wild barley growing along the path. "I've been thinking about the well. It's too shallow. Water's gone cloudy." "I can dig it deeper," Michael said. "If you've got a second shovel." "I do." "Handles crack, though. I've worked with worse." She paused, then looked over her shoulder. "You always this agreeable?" "No," he said. "Only when it matters." The corner of her mouth twitched, not a smile, not yet, but close. "I'll show you where I keep the tools." After the children wake, they spent the morning tending small things. Michael gathered timber from around the creek bend, splitting it clean for a new fence post. Susanna patched a torn sleeve of Calvin's shirt with thread worn thin from use. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. By midday, the sun rose high and hot. Michael stripped his coat and rolled up his sleeves while digging beside the well. The cracked shovel bit stubbornly into the packed earth, but he kept at it, sweat running down his back. Susanna brought him a tin of cool water and watched from the edge of shade. "You always work quiet. Talking takes breath," he said, wiping his brow. "You could have kept riding past," she said, tilting her face toward the sun. "Most men would have." "I'm not most men." She stepped closer, holding his gaze. "I don't know what to make of you yet." "I'm not asking you to," he replied. "Only that you let me stay until you feel safe." Her eyes searched his, and for the first time something in her eased. "All right." That evening the children helped carry in the last of the firewood. Clara handed Michael a twig shaped like a crooked Y. "Is this good kindling?" she asked. He crouched beside her. "That's the best kind." She grinned, then darted back inside. Calvin lingered near the doorway, shifting on his feet. Michael met his eyes. "You keeping watch, too?" The boy's voice was quiet. "Mama used to say the trees could hear." "She was right," Michael said. "They remember everything." Calvin nodded like he understood. Then he ducked inside without another word. After supper, Susanna walked out behind the cabin, apron in her hands. Michael followed, carrying the lantern. They stood side by side, the air thick with the scent of pine and ash. "I don't expect this to be easy," she said. "I don't even know how to live with someone again." "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "Just a place by the fire." She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been a long time since anyone offered without wanting something back." He set the lantern down and stepped close enough to see the freckles across her nose. "What I want is to stay, because it feels right. Not because I'm owed," her breath caught. "You scare me." "I know," he said. "But not all fear means danger." She reached up and touched the edge of his shirt sleeve, her fingers light. "I don't want to be alone anymore." "Then you won't be." She didn't pull her hand away, and for the first time since arriving, Michael felt the land begin to breathe again. The next morning brought a hush over the land that felt different than the day before, like the hills were listening more than watching. Michael noticed it as he stepped out to check the horses, his boots soft against the earth still damp from the night's dew. One of the geldings had a limp in its right foreleg. He crouched, fingers brushing the fetlock, finding a stone wedged deep. He worked it loose and stood just as Susanna came around the side of the cabin with a pail in her hand. "There's a man buried up near the ridge," she said without preamble. Michael straightened. "Family? No, neighbor from 2 claims over. He came by sometimes, helped me mend the roof in spring." She set the pail down by the trough. "When the men came through, he tried to stop them. He waited. They shot him and left him for the crows. I buried him myself 2 days later." Michael looked toward the distant ridge, then back at her. "You want me to mark it proper? He deserves more than a pile of rocks, but the ground up there's too dry for a crosspost." Her voice was steady, but her hands curled at her sides. "I didn't tell the children. They'd seen enough. I'll figure something," he said. "He should be remembered." She nodded once and walked past him, pausing only to brush her fingers against the horse's neck. "The limp bad, no worse than a lie. He'll be right in a day or two." That afternoon, while the children gathered wild onions near the creek, Michael took his tools up the ridge. He worked in silence, shaping a marker from a slab of cedar he found behind the shed. He carved the man's initials with the tip of his hunting blade, every cut deliberate. When he came back down, Susanna didn't ask what he'd done. She only handed him a strip of dried meat and sat beside him as they watched the sun lean westward. Later, after the children were asleep and the wind had settled, Michael carried 2 chairs out to the porch. Susanna brought a shawl and a tin box of sewing scraps. She didn't speak for a long while, her eyes fixed on her needle working through a square of muslin. "My father never stayed in one place longer than a season," she said eventually. "He'd plant half a crop, then vanish with someone's mule. My mother followed him till she couldn't any more." Michael listened. "I swore I'd never live rootless. That's why I stayed when my sister passed. This land doesn't give much, but it lets you try again." She tied off her thread and held the cloth up to the moonlight. "You believe people can change. I've seen it," he said. "Sometimes it takes loss to make room for it." She leaned back in the chair, one foot tucked beneath her. "I keep wondering if I'd have done anything different if I'd known what was coming." "You did what you could with what you had. That's all anyone can do." The silence between them grew comfortable, like the pause in a song before the next note. Then she said, "You've been sleeping out back." "There's a cot in the barn. It's dry and the door latches." He met her eyes. "You sure?" "I wouldn't offer if I weren't." He stood, not reaching for her, just looking. "I'll be close by if anything changes." As he stepped off the porch, she said, "Michael." He turned. "I used to think safety came from solitude," she said. "But maybe it's something else." He didn't answer, but the look he gave her held more weight than words. That night, sleep came easier. The barn was cool, and the scent of hay reminded him of a time when the world had been simpler. He lay on the cot with his rifle beside him and the door latched tight against the dark. In the early hours, a soft knock stirred him. He opened the door to find Susanna standing there in her nightdress, shawl wrapped tight. "I can't sleep," she said. The quiet feels too loud." He stepped aside and she came in. She didn't ask for anything. She just sat on a bale of straw, her hands resting in her lap. "I never had someone I could sit with when the dark pressed like this," she said. "You do now." She looked over, and her eyes didn't hold fear anymore, just tiredness and something else, something that had begun to take root. "If we make it through the next week," she said, "would you stay till spring?" "I'll stay as long as you'll have me." And this time when she nodded, it wasn't guarded or uncertain. It was a beginning. The ground was firmer beneath the morning sun. Michael felt it in the give of the soil as he drove the last of the new fence posts into place. The old ones had rotted near the base, barely holding. Now, cedar stood in their place, strung tight with fresh wire. He wiped his hands on his trousers and looked toward the cabin. Smoke curled steadily from the chimney, and the door stood open to the breeze. It felt like something was beginning to settle. Susanna was at the table when he stepped inside, wrapping cloth around wedges of cornbread. She didn't look up right away, but when she did, her face was flushed from the stove. "I was thinking we could ride into town tomorrow," she said. "There's a peddler that comes through twice a month. I need flour and Clara's outgrown her shoes." "It's a full day's ride?" Michael asked. "Half if we leave early. There's a woman there, Mrs. Tiller, she minds children for coin. I've left them with her before." Michael glanced toward the bedroom. "They'll be all right with her. She's hard-handed but honest. They'll be safe," he nodded. "I'll check the horses this evening." "I'll ride with you. You don't have to, I know." She folded the cloth and tucked it into a tin. "You ever spend time in settlements now and then, long enough to know I prefer the quiet?" Susanna leaned her hip against the table. "You get uneasy around crowds, not uneasy, just weary. Too many voices all at once, none of them meaning much." She watched him a moment, then crossed to the cupboard. "I used to like the sound of people, laughter, talk. After the war, when everything had gone quiet, I missed it." Michael stepped closer. "You were here through it. My husband enlisted. Never came back. I waited 2 winters before I stopped setting out his plate." He didn't speak, just let the silence breathe between them. She took down a small tin and twisted it open, revealing a length of faded blue ribbon. "He gave me this the day he left, said it reminded him of the sky over the wheat fields." Michael studied the ribbon, the frayed edge where it had once been tied. "You want to keep it?" "I'm not sure anymore." She pressed it between the pages of a ledger and closed the book with care. "Sometimes I feel like my life split in half that day. Before and after." Michael nodded. "I understand that." She looked up. "Do you still think about them, your wife and boy, every day, but it doesn't hurt the same way it used to?" Susanna traced the lip of the tin with her thumb. "I keep waiting for the ache to go quiet." "It doesn't," he said, "but it changes shape." That night, after the children were asleep and the lantern burned low, Susanna brought out a small wooden box and sat beside Michael on the porch. She set it on the step between them. "My sister left this to me," she said. "Said it held things worth remembering." He waited while she opened the lid. Inside were a few yellowed letters, a lock of hair tied with twine, and a brooch shaped like a swallow in flight. "She wore that every Sunday," Susanna said, "even when there was no one to see it." Michael reached for the brooch but didn't touch. "You look like her, people said so, but she was softer, kinder." "You're kind," he said. She looked at him, uncertain. "You don't know that. I've seen enough to know what lives under silence." She closed the lid and rested her hands in her lap. "I didn't expect to feel this. Steady with someone again. You don't have to explain." "I want to." Michael turned to face her in the quiet. "Then I'll listen." She took a breath, her voice even. "When I heard your boots coming through the brush that morning, I nearly pulled the trigger. I didn't care who you were, I know. But you didn't flinch. You looked at me like I was whole." "You are," she swallowed, and something in her posture softened like a rope easing under tension. "I don't want to be afraid to want things." He reached out, slow and certain, and laid his hand over hers. "Then don't be." Her fingers curled around his, and she looked out across the dark. "I'd like to see the wheat fields again someday," she said. "The kind that make the sky look smaller. We'll find them," he said. She leaned her shoulder against his, and they sat like that until the stars came out, quiet as breath. The dark no longer pressing, but full of space they could grow into. They left before first light, the children bundled in quilts in the back of the wagon, the wheels creaking softly as they pulled away from the cabin. Michael rode ahead, reins loose in his hands, while Susanna sat beside Clara and Calvin, keeping them drowsy and warm. The sky was barely more than a smear of gray when they reached the open stretch of prairie that led toward the settlement. They passed no one for the first hour. The land moved by in quiet waves, silver grass swaying like breath, cottonwoods thinning out as they neared the flatter ridge. Michael kept his eyes forward, but once when he glanced back, he saw the way Susanna was watching him. She didn't look away. They reached the edge of town just as the morning sun began to warm the dust. The settlement was little more than a cluster of buildings: trading post, smithy, chapel, a few homes weathered to gray. A dog barked from somewhere near the livery, and a boy chased a hoop down the main road. Susanna lifted the children from the wagon and guided them toward a squat house with a red curtain in the window. "You sure?" Michael asked as she reached the door. "She's fair," she said, "and she owes me a favor." He waited until the children were inside before he spoke again. "I'll walk with you." They moved slowly through the street, past a group of riders tying up their horses, past a woman sweeping ash from her stoop. A man with a crooked back nodded as they passed, his eyes lingering on Michael's revolver. Nobody asked questions. Inside the trading post, it smelled of kerosene, tobacco, and dried apples. Shelves lined every wall, sacks of flour stacked beside bolts of calico, tin pails beside jars of lye soap. A man behind the counter scratched something into a ledger with a stub of pencil and didn't look up. "I'll be quick," Susanna said. Michael drifted toward a barrel filled with tools, examining the handle of a hatchet. He didn't buy it. He didn't need to. When he turned, Susanna was holding a pair of small shoes against her hip, her face unreadable. "They'll fit Clara," she said. "Calvin can wear his through winter." She moved to the counter and laid them down along with 2 sacks of flour, a tin of lard, and a bundle of dried beans. Michael stepped beside her. "I'll cover it." Her head turned. "I didn't ask you to. I know I want to." The shopkeeper finally looked up. "That'll be $1.15. Michael paid without ceremony. As they stepped out into the sunlight, Susanna said, "You didn't have to do that. I know." She didn't argue further. They found the children sitting on a bench outside the chapel, both holding small corn husk dolls the woman must have given them. Clara showed hers to Michael, her face bright. "This one's got a bonnet," she said. "Like Aunt Susanna's." He crouched beside her. "And what's her name?" Clara thought hard. "Maggie." Calvin held his tighter. "Mine's just a doll." "Nothing wrong with that," Michael said. "Some things don't need naming." They rode home slower than they came. A cloud bank had thickened above the far hills, and the air felt like it might storm, but never did. Near the creek crossing, the wagon hitched slightly over a rut. Susanna steadied the reins with one hand and lightly rested the other on Michael's arm. "Do you ever think about staying in one place?" she asked. "I think about it more now than I ever did." She didn't respond, but her fingers didn't move. That night, after the children were asleep, Michael sat on the porch sharpening his knife by lantern light. Susanna stepped out carrying a folded quilt and sank down beside him. "I found my sister's old ledger," she said. She used to record every jar she canned, every stitch she sewed, said it helped her feel steady. "You planning to start one?" he asked. "I already did." She hesitated. "I wrote your name in it." He watched her, the lantern casting soft light on the curve of her cheek. "What for?" She met his eyes. "Because you're part of this now." The knife paused against the whetstone. "You sure?" She reached over and took the blade from his hand, setting it gently aside. "I've never been more." Michael drew a breath, slow and steady, and reached for her hand. Her fingers met his without hesitation. There was no need for more words. The days that followed turned easier, not because the work was less, but because it no longer fell on one pair of shoulders. Michael took to repairing the barn roof, while Susanna taught Clara how to measure flour without spilling it. Calvin followed Michael from chore to chore, never saying much, but mimicking his stride, his grip on the axe handle, the way he looked to the sky before deciding if it would rain. One afternoon, Susanna stood at the edge of the garden, dirt on her palms, and said, "You could build a lean-to by the barn, make it into something decent." Michael looked up from where he was mending a harness. "You want me out of the house?" She smiled, not coy, just sure. "No. I want you to have a place for your things." He set the harness down. "You want me to stay?" "I already asked you to." He rose, brushing off his hands, and crossed the clearing to her. "Then I will." And that night, in the quiet warmth of the cabin, with the fire low and the children curled together in sleep, Michael kissed her for the first time. There was no rush in it, no question. Just two people who had carried too much for too long, finally letting go. They married the following spring. Not with fanfare, just a simple vow before the preacher who rode circuit through the territory. Clara wore a ribbon in her hair, and Calvin carried the ring on a piece of twine. The four of them walked home afterward, hand in hand, the wind warm and steady at their backs. The land did not change. It was still hard, still wild in parts, still full of silence and wind. But now it held a home with a door that stayed open, a quilt folded at the foot of the bed, and two people who no longer kept their sorrow to themselves. Michael planted wheat that year. It didn't take much, just a strip behind the barn, but it was enough. And when the first stalks bent golden in the breeze, Susanna stood beside him, her hand resting just over his heart, and said, "Looks like the sky's getting smaller." He looked at her and said, "That's because we've made room for something bigger." They watched the wind move through the grain, the children laughing somewhere near the creek, and knew they were home. Together, they had built something the world couldn't take away, and they were never alone again.